Talk Show. Recorded live.
Welcome to the 102nd Virtualization Security Podcast. And we're going to it's the Virtualization Security Roundtable, and I think it's more about cloud security these days than virtualization security, but that's all right. I'd like to welcome our panelist, Eben Rodriguez, who's an IT industry veteran, now serving as a cloud solution advisor for CA Technologies. Thank you for joining us, Eben. Michael Bennett, who is a... I don't have it written down, Michael. You are an independent contributor or a primary principal at a stealth startup. Is that the way it goes now?
No, I'm an employee of a stealth startup, but my advertised title is member technical staff.
Member of the technical staff of a stealth startup. Will you guys be announcing anything at RSA conference this year?
No, we will not.
Okay, but you will be there.
He can neither confirm nor deny.
That's right. Just so people aren't looking for me, wondering whether I'm there or not. I'm in the Bay Area, but I'm not going to be at the conference this year.
Well, why don't you come up and we'll have a coffee or a drink or something?
I'll try. We'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Don't put me on the spot on the podcast, man.
You can neither confirm nor deny. And I'd actually like to welcome a brand new panelist. He's been actually part of the podcast for quite a while now, almost since episode number 2. And I'd like to welcome Mike Foley from VMware Technical Marketing Team, where his focus is security on the vSphere platform. I'm also thinking the vCloud suite as well. And I'd like to welcome Mike Foley as a permanent panelist.
Thank you.
Woo-hoo. Welcome.
Huh?
Does this come with like a watch or something?
Comes with a hearty thank you, and if we ever get together, I'll buy you a beer. How's that?
I can live with that.
Yeah,
you can live with that? Okay.
Yeah, I regret to inform you, it does not make you a chick magnet, nor does it lead to fame and fortune.
My wife will be very happy for the former. Very disappointed. Latter.
And our guest panelist this week is Bankem. And Bankem, I'm going to mispronounce your last name, so you get to say it.
Sure. It's Bankem Tejani.
Tejani, who's a senior security architect at Service Mesh, and it's very nice to have Service Mesh finally on the podcast. Trying to branch out from normally we get different vendors, and we've had maybe one customer, I believe. We've had a teenager even, and now we have Service Mesh. So you're in good company.
Great. Hopefully we're better than a teenager, but maybe slightly less entertaining.
Yeah.
They were very entertaining. Wasn't she even?
Nah.
He had to leave early to go do his homework.
That was Chris's daughter, wasn't it?
Huh?
Yeah, my daughter had fun on the show.
Yeah.
Eben's daughter, right? Yeah.
Eben's daughter, yeah. And we still get comments about that occasionally, which is rather nice. You can let her know she's well thought of.
All right, thank you.
So, Bankem, as you can tell, we're a fairly informal lot. So why don't you tell us kind of what you do, what Service Mesh does for us from a security perspective, and we can go from there.
Sure. So I guess I'll start with a little bit of an intro as to what Service Mesh does and what our product does for the customer perspective, and then we can talk about security and my role in that. So our product is called Agility Platform, and really what it enables is the creation of self-service IT within enterprises. And so when enterprises look at the landscape, they've got their existing investments, some of which may include a little virtualization, but they've got their common operating environments, they've got their server environments and everything else. And then on the flip side, they look out into the world and they see these modern disruptive startups that are fully in the cloud, the Etsy's and the Netflixes of the world that are doing everything in the cloud. And to move from one to the other is too drastic, really, for most enterprises to swallow, partly because it's not solely just about the infrastructure that they're using, the compute and the storage, but it's also about their applications, right? And those companies that are fully in the cloud, so to speak, have built their applications and their platform around that model. And our kind of current large enterprises can't just pivot on a dime to redesigning all their applications. So they want some of the benefit of being in the cloud, of leveraging some combination of public infrastructure for compute, for storage, or better leverage their existing virtual infrastructures for compute and storage, as well as being able to tie into some of these cloud services. And so our platform enables that for that customer and for their business. So the IT division and department can take our platform and open that up to the business, where the business can now go and provision systems very similar to how they might do it if they were to go shadow IT and just to go to Amazon and open up instances. They can enable similar processes with the same speed and scale, but by leveraging some of their existing infrastructure and providing a pathway to migrate their existing applications to be more cloud-centric without having to go, fully jump in the pool all the way.
Okay, well that's great. And do you actually allow them to use the cloud services as part of their initial IT?
That's right. So they can, when they launch our platform, they can connect, and they can connect up to different cloud providers. Amazon is one that we support, as well as vCloud, so if they have a private one. And we support a number of other providers, and we've got some extensibility for that, so more providers can be added as needed. But what we want to do is to enable that customer not just to use the cloud, but to leverage some of their existing investments. So most large enterprises have a common operating environment or a standard operating environment. Well, you're not really going to take that environment and convince Amazon to make that a public image that anyone in the world can use. But what you can do is you can take your environment and all the investment that you've made into testing it, securing it, and so forth, and now make that a reusable image in our platform and use that image in multiple cloud environments. And so you can take those building blocks that you've created, turn that into a reusable entity in our environment. Now, anybody in your business can spin up, let's say it's more than one environment. Let's say it's like a lamp stack. Someone in your business can just say, I need a lamp stack today, and spin it up where I have access to it. And if you don't have a virtual resource available internally, they might spin that up in a cloud provider just so they can get started with doing their work and prototyping their new application or their new design.
So, gentlemen, actually, I forgot to introduce myself as well before we get going. My name is Edward Haletke. I'm the owner of the Virtualization Security podcast, and I've written a few books out there. So if you need to, just go ahead and Google that. And if you want to, it's servicemesh.com, I believe, right?
Yes, servicemesh.com.
Okay. I'll double check, make sure we got it all. So go to www.servicemesh.com if you'd like to find more about Service Mesh. But the big question we have here is, okay, I've got all that. Great. I now put some instances out in Amazon. I put some instances out in some vCloud. I've done the public cloud thing. And you're generally working with fairly secure interfaces. Amazon does their APIs, right? And even George Reese will agree that Amazon does their APIs fairly stringently and strong. And we had him on and talking about that. So for the administration side, we know that things are fairly secure. But then, so on the administration side, we know the clouds do it better than anybody else. So we seem to think that. Anybody else want to comment on that before we go on? We've had this discussion many times, I would say.
I would say on the whole that you're correct, right? I mean, it's in Amazon's incentive to do it right, and I think they've done a good job with that. I think you'll always have a theoretical argument that there could be vulnerabilities, there's uncertainty, because there's really a lot of fear and uncertainty about that because it's not in your environment. But on the whole, they are doing the right things for that, and it will continue to get better. I think that's an important aspect to remember.
Absolutely. And when you start thinking about that, the administrative side is rather unappealing to me because we've covered it so many times. But what really is interesting, I think, is the client side, the application side of that equation.
Yep.
What does Service Mesh provide, or what are the best practices you guys talk about when people do bring their applications or their platforms to do development into a public cloud? I mean, we're not talking simple things.
Yeah, and that's a great question. So there's a number of things that we provide. Right? So one, when you're looking at the building blocks, kind of the first level building block that we provide is the ability to compose your image, right? That represents your one server or service that you're running, and that those building blocks will include your OS, the agents and utilities that you want to put in there, your own application code, whatever other services you have. But with all of those things, and throughout the application, throughout our platform, we provide governance and policy. So you can put in place, the ability to check and verify some of these things that you want. So if there are certain building blocks that you don't want in there, you can have that created by creating policies that say, when you detect this, require an approval, or don't allow this image to get spun up, and there's various actions that you might be able to take to do that. So we've got a governance and policy engine kind of baked into the platform, and when you go beyond just that one image and you go to creating many of them, we also have the concept of environments. So you can create environments that have different rules and policies attached. So just as you might have in your current infrastructure, a dev, a QA, and a production environment, and hopefully, they are reflective of that, so that production is much more locked down. You have a QA or a staging that's equivalent to your production environment.
I'm going to take exception with that, and then some of the others may or may not agree with me on this. In that if you're going to take a dev environment and put it into the cloud, it better well be locked down. And the reason why I say that is generally the data that a developer is using is generally unencrypted because they're developing just to make sure it works. It is usually production data. It is not obfuscated data. It's not tokenized data. You're using the real stuff. Probably if you're typing about PII, you want to make sure you can search on the Social Security number properly. I'm imagining the Social Security numbers are really there. So if you're going to put dev in the cloud, you better lock it down.
Let me finish one thing, and I totally agree with you. I'm not certainly fully agree there. But one of the things that you can do with that is in those environments, you can have different policies and rules and infrastructure. So you could say, in my dev environment, that whatever I put here, this dev environment is only within a VPC, a fully private cloud environment. It can only be in my own data center inside these specific systems that are quarantined off. And you may even be able to, depending on the types of applications you're putting out there, control which databases or which data sets you put in there. So I agree with you that you want to have that. You don't want to start your dev process fully facing the internet. That's just not a good idea. But the point being, you can configure these environments to your needs as a customer or as an enterprise, and leverage that to create a transition. And when you look at the internet landscape, Facebook and Netflix and Etsy, these are companies that are kind of known for direct deployment to the internet as part of what they publish. Facebook explicitly doesn't have QA environments. These companies do a lot of A/B testing and test deployments and so forth, but they're really working off live site. Well, our enterprises, our large enterprises, are not ready for that today, and so what this creates for them is an ability to take some of their existing workflows and business processes around software development and deployment and enable that to work in a way that they can leverage cloud computing and cloud resources in a more efficient, economical way, and still get some of the speed without having to wait for all the provisioning of their current legacy IT.
Okay. So,
but I agree with your point. I mean, the last thing you want to do is to start up and muck around with real data facing the internet. It's just not a good idea.
And the thing is that a lot of people, when they start using Amazon, that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go out in Amazon and put an instance out there, the vast majority of companies are not using VPCs.
That's right.
At all.
And they may not even be aware that as soon as you spin up an instance in Amazon, in a public-facing instance, you're getting scanned, you're getting analyzed, and it's instantaneous, right? I mean, within minutes of standing it up, you're going to get analyzed and by a whole host of threats and scanners.
I got proof in point. While I didn't put a workload into an Amazon cloud, I did put a workload into another cloud that will remain nameless. And it's a public cloud, and we put out our standard stuff and with using their security. And when we did that, we were instantaneously hacked. It was like minutes. We literally had to wipe the image and restart from fresh.
Yeah.
All right, but let's back up for a second. And again, this is not, we're not. The purpose of this call is not to demonstrate our love and fealty to Amazon, but let's just point out that by default, an Amazon instance comes to you set up a certain way, right? It's set up unless you take other action. Basically, you can SSH into it. You can't SSH as root. You're forced to SSH as another user. That other user is forced to SSH using a certificate, not a password. By default, in notification of updates is automatically configured. Every time I log into my instance, if there's a security update, available, I'm reminded that I should install it. And
you're absolutely right, my friend. I wasn't talking about SSH.
Why is Amazon forcing me to do it that way? Because they know, right, that anything in the Amazon cloud is going to be scanned immediately. And so, if I as a user am not careful, or I turn certain things on, maybe there's I think you were trying to point out there could be an SSH hack, right? Of course, there have been in the past. There aren't currently, knock on wood. But that is of course a risk. But they are by default. And I give them all credit for this. They're, by default, they're giving you a pretty restricted environment at the get-go. And
absolutely, but is it restrictive enough?
Well,
once you put the application on there, is it restrictive enough? Yes, SSH is locked down. Yes, there is.
But look at why we've got this service. This is again why are we having this call today, right? You as a user, if you don't know what you're doing, you can, of course, open up that instance or any instance. So no matter how secure an instance could be, I mean, I guess an Amazon instance could be even more secure. You don't even allow SSH in. You're forced to come in through the management portal. If you believe the management portal is more secure than SSH, I'm not sure that's true, but maybe you believe it is. But in any case, once you start putting applications on there, and you objected to an earlier characterization, if you put a dev environment in there and that dev environment is not locked down, if that dev environment is running Ruby on Rails and it's got this bug or that bug, of course it could be immediately compromised. But I think that's why, tell us why Service Desk exists, right? Why have a business? Service Mesh, right? Why have this business if not to help people secure their instances in any cloud? That's the point, correct?
I think that's one of the points. And the company Service Mesh wasn't focused, didn't start up around security. Certainly, that's something that has become part of our goals and what we want to enable for our customers. But our focus is still on automating all of these processes for customers so that not just that you could have a secure instance, but that you could much more easily deploy thousands of instances of an image very, very quickly. And you can do that in automated, scalable, repeatable ways with audit trails and policy and governance. And security is a piece of that, absolutely. But that's not to say that security is the end-all, be-all, because as we all know, we can build the most secure system, but if it's not functional, doesn't have business value, then it doesn't matter. And so our mission is to bridge all of that. So let me talk a little bit about some of the security elements that you can kind of enable. So one is with reuse. So one of the key ways is, and where you can certainly shoot yourself in public clouds is if you go out and if you take your own image. Amazon certainly provides you images that you can use, and they're generally configured great by default. But as you were alluding to, if you as the customer then open those ports back up, then you've shot yourself in the foot, and really Amazon, it's tough to hold Amazon accountable for that when you're the one who did those actions. Well, in the enterprise environment, we want to enable the same thing. And so we can create one at our environmental layer, the lockdowns that we want from a network perspective. So even if somebody opens up an individual host inside of an environment, it's still protected by the rules of that environment. And that can be a mixture of virtual firewalls and VLANs that connect to the instances and the cloud services that are underneath our platform. It can all be done also within policy.
No, you're making an assumption. I mean, I think there's a lot of assumptions going on here.
Right.
When you get an instance from Amazon, a public cloud instance from any public cloud vendor, there may or may not be a firewall in front of it. There may or may not be a firewall configured on the virtual machine or the instance you get, or instances if you have an application that takes more than one app, more than one VM workload. And
those are some of the things that we provide kind of with our platform out of the box, the ability to configure that and ensure that there is a firewall always there, that you can, as you set up your image, set up your firewall rules that you want in place, and have it such that that's something that can be driven either by policy or reinforced by policy, so that if a user who's now using this image as it's running goes in and manually changes something, the platform will detect that and understand that a setting has changed from the original and either change it back or create an event that can be alerted and notified.
But let's think about a typical LAMP stack. I may have my Apache server on one, running Perl or PHP or Python or whatever, Ruby on Rails or whatever I want. I may have, or I may be running Tomcat on that server. I may have a database that's on a different server, and if I'm lucky, the cloud will provide me an internal link between the two that's not facing any customer, any internet, which would be great. And may or may not do VLANs. But as soon as I put that LAMP stack out there, I know port 80 and 443 are going to be available.
Yep.
All right. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, if I'm running on Linux, knocking it down past the port, almost impossible. You've got port-level controls at the operating system. You need something more than that. You need application firewalls. You need application control. And the big question becomes is how can you do that in a repeatable, audible fashion that won't instantaneously be hacked as you go from point A to point B where you're trying to lock it down?
Yeah. And there's a number of...
Duncan, before I go,
sure.
Michael, that was my approach all the time. I could care less about SSH. Yes, they lock down management really well. And a lot of service providers do that, but they don't necessarily protect the application very well. First off, they don't even know what the application will be.
Yeah, I would argue that somebody in the IaaS business, maybe you could argue it's not even obligated to try to lock down the application.
And even in the platform as a service business, I'm not sure it's even obligated to do that either because they don't know what application you're going to be running on the platform.
Well, I think there depends on what you define as a platform. Exactly. But
I think part of the problem is that with the ease of being able to stand up instances in the cloud, all you need is a credit card. It's like impulse buying stuff you probably should have investigated.
Well, I think you need an architecture before you enter the cloud. You can't just go buy, set up, and assume it's going to work.
That's not there, right? Well, no, none of us are going to disagree with what you just said, Ed. But I think what Mike was saying, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, so I'll say it, and then Mike can correct me. Is that the cloud enables any business unit, any user in any business unit with a credit card to create whatever the heck they want to create. And they don't need to go through the ID department. They don't need to go through governance. They can just go do it. And often that is how it happens. I would agree there.
And that's why you start seeing companies going after folks like Service Mesh or what used to be Dynamic Ops and so on and so forth, where the corporate policy is if you need something, you go here and use your credit card. And all of those agreements between the Amazons and Savises of the world have already been worked out at a corporate level, and IT gets out of the way because they've done all the due diligence beforehand.
Yeah, that would be my question. I didn't hear this in the Service Mesh intro, but do you essentially provide a web portal to your enterprise customers so that any user in that enterprise can go to your web portal and get what they need?
Yep, that's precisely what Agility Platform is. So we're not a SaaS or a PaaS provider. This is an application the enterprise IT will put out within that enterprise and to do exactly what was just said, which is to allow any user in that company to go to the Agility Platform, log in, and in their account, they're already pre-provisioned to have access to deploy. And they can deploy to Amazon, they can deploy to an internal virtual cloud, some other provider, whatever has been configured. And from an enterprise perspective, you can now manage and govern that. And that's, when we talk about shadow IT, that's the largest challenge, is that IT is no longer a monopoly. It's competing against anything that's out there in the public.
It's competing
because
against
all you need is a credit card. You can go, all you need is a credit card, and you can go consume some some infrastructure IT service or a platform service or a software service. And so that's the competition.
Hold on one second. Mike Foley, go ahead.
Yeah, the thing I tell folks when I'm speaking in front of a large crowd is how many of you are using the cloud, and a whole bunch of hands go, some hands go up, and how many are not using the cloud, a whole bunch of hands, and I said, you're all wrong. You really ought to go to finance, run a report on your corporate cards against Amazon and any number of other cloud vendors, and you'll find out you're using the cloud, you just don't know it.
Yep.
And that assumes someone has bothered to expense the $4 a month. In some cases, it's not enough money that you may not even be seeing it yet, but it's still happening.
Exactly. And I think the question really is not, are you using the cloud? It's how you're using the cloud.
Right.
Are you using it smart, intelligently? Exactly.
Because it's inevitable that you're using it, even if you happen to be fortunate enough that nobody in your company has gone out and started spending this, they're going to. Because it's too compelling, it's easy to use for developers, and that's what we want to create for the business and for developers is that same ease of use within the enterprise, where you still have some protection from all of the investments that your enterprise has made in knowing how to configure systems and make all of those things reusable entities that you can leverage.
Okay. So, this still begs the question, though, is granted I can now have a policy-driven setup that says, hey, you know, this type of workload must be in a VPC, it must have this type of networking around it.
Yep.
It maybe need to have some sort of firewall settings. But again, that's just what surrounds the application. I really want to think about when you start putting applications in the public cloud, there's more to security than just what surrounds it.
Yep.
I mean, the concept of having a web application firewall right there inside your application, or some sort of application level firewall that says this is what's known good traffic, this is what's not, maybe something developers need to start thinking about putting right in their code because of the nature of attacks these days.
So I think, and I should probably quantify, I may be speaking from a loaded deck, so to speak, on that subject. So my previous role before I joined Service Mesh, I spent the previous 5 years advising and working with customers. I was at Fortify Software, and I was working with customers deploying security concepts and application security into their SDLC. So I absolutely agree with you in terms of needing that discussion as part of your software architecture and design, and as part of your deployment of your software, irrespective of whether you're deploying in the cloud or not in the cloud, or in virtualization or not in virtualization. You've got to have that because you don't know. Even if you've initially designed your platform or your application to be, inside of your corporate infrastructure, you have no idea what that really means once it's actually deployed. Will it still be deployed that way, 1-2 years down the road, or are you going to just put it out on the internet? You have no idea, and so you've got to have that conversation during your development process.
And if you're in the cloud, things change. I mean, the cloud provider may change the way it's doing something. They may lose a core switch or something one day, which is now on a backup, which doesn't have the routes to the big WAF you invested in, or the big firewalls. Now it's going through just the little itty-bitty IP tables that's sitting on your Linux box. And by the way, that is little itty-bitty because it can handle that depending on how much memory. I mean, as far as I can tell, not more than 50,000 news sessions per second, but millions of concurrent sessions. If the news sessions are going to kill you.
Yeah.
Depending on your application again.
Yep. And I think what's interesting to me as a problem area with the cloud is exactly this. And where you look at one application. If you look at one application, you take that and you say, okay, these are the steps we have to take to secure it. We need to do things with our software design. We need to do things with our configuration. We need to make sure when we deploy it to the cloud, it has these things. And we need to have verification of all of that over time as things change, because, as you said, the providers change, the infrastructure may change over time. So that's one application. When you're a large enterprise and you've got thousands of these applications, it's a whole different scale of operating. And this is both one of the best benefits of the cloud and one of the, kind of, I wouldn't call it a risk, I'd say it's just kind of a caution area for enterprises that move too quickly without thinking. In that you can, one of the advantages of the cloud is you can automate all of these things. It's all driven by API and accessible by function calls. And so you can create automation to do a lot of that work. But if you don't, or if you allow all these applications out to be internet-facing without trying to automate those, then all of your existing security processes that are, not cloud-centric and not automated won't scale. And this is one of the things that I saw in my last role, is that most companies, forget the cloud for a second, most large enterprises they don't have the resources or the automation or skills to do an application security scan of every web application they have on an annual basis, right? And we're not even talking quarterly or monthly or with the latest threat that's come out. Just on an annual basis, they can't do, most of them can't do 25 or 30% of their applications on an annual basis. So
no,
if you're talking,
I mean, go ahead. Sorry.
No, so when you're looking at it and going cloud with that, that's only going to get worse, right? As you're changing and redeploying and redeveloping applications, and instead of a 6-month deployment cycle for your individual application on average, now you're going to go to 3 months or 1 month or weekly, and you can't possibly keep up with that with a security team that's doing manual, web scans or manual code audits on those applications. You've got to automate that at the same pace and scale that your developers are going to be deploying these applications into, whether it's a cloud or a private environment.
Absolutely. Not only that, you want those scans to be part as close to the code as possible. So one of the things you want to do is actually put it inside your SDLC directly. So like maybe part of submitting to the code repository, it does the simplest type of scan possible. Did you do anything that is noticeably wrong, like buffer overflows, using string copy versus string end copy, the standard static code analysis? Can you still do it?
This is important. I mean, you're touching on a lot of different parts of SDLC, right? Whether it's post-commit hooks, so that certain automated scans are required. But there's a sheer numbers problem that you're alluding to, and this then bridges that gap between vulnerability and defect scanning and configuration management, right? I'm familiar with an enterprise. I'm just as an example, and there's certainly people bigger than this, people smaller than this, but in general, all clouds are bigger than this. But this enterprise has 4,000 Oracle servers, and it is simply infeasible for them to scan all of those servers in a timely way. Now,
so this is where I think there's the best advantage for moving to the cloud and cloud orchestration.
If you've got to do configuration management at the same time, you can say, look, what I've really got is 4,000 database servers deployed and configured 100 different ways. And I've got 2 jobs. One, to keep those 100 configurations secure, and 2, to make sure those 4,000 instances are synced or configured according to these 100 configuration baselines. I mean, that's right. And I'm guessing that's the answer you're about to talk about, is that with the cloud, we can automate these things.
Exactly. Yep. And that's where you can, because what you can create is, and like you said, you're going to have many variations of a particular platform, even just one database that you're using. One, let's say Oracle in your case is what you mentioned as an example, but you might have 100 different configurations of that. So what you can do with Agility Platform is start with one, and you create that, and this is your base. But in that one, you can bake in the automation to check and verify those things. So either to verify the settings that you expect, but also to put in hooks and actions to do the analysis. So if you've got a database scanning tool like App Detective that will analyze a database, you can hook that in to Agility Platform as something that will run once an instance of this database is created. And so now, whether you spin up 10 or 100, each one that gets spun up, it's going to follow an automated a script of what gets put onto that machine, how it gets configured, and then once it's finished configuration, you can have a post action that will go and say, okay, I'm ready, scan me. And that could be a push by event, or it can be go and invoke this script that will now run the scanning tool on this other system and come back and scan you now that you've been created, and have those results sent off somewhere that to an analyst that's going to look at them. And as we get into the future, and I am talking about this conceptually, is you can now look to start to tie all these automations together, and say, okay, when this fails or these specific tests fail, I want you to spin this machine back down because it's failed, and tell the person who tried to spin it up they've got to go fix this one problem or this configuration to do that. And so by doing that in an automated way, now you can do all 4,000 because every time one of those 4,000 databases gets rebooted or spun up, it's going to get analyzed. And you can also have operational actions that happen on schedule. So beyond just having that particular server analyzed when it's spun up, you may also have it analyzed every month or every quarter or every week, whatever you're capable of handling in terms of that. And so that's one of the areas where we're looking at working with our customers and expanding those automation capabilities. All of the automation capability is there, but we want to help create more reusable use cases for some of these problems.
And Mike, you wanted to bring up identity.
Yeah. So while we're on the call, I was going to go into the Service Mesh website and noticing you're using Federated Identity Manager, which I think is great, or Federated Identities. Do you see the adoption of SAML-type based solutions increasing? It seemed like SAML came out some number of years ago. There was a big to-do about that sort of stuff around the mid-2000s, and then it's gone dead. And it seems like in the past year, everybody and their mother's doing SAML.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing the same. And I mean, I've been kind of involved with that in my last role as well. We did a lot with identity for that product platform. And I think where SAML stalled that during those periods of years is that as a concept you had it, but the existing systems that enterprises were using, LDAP and Active Directory primarily, really weren't compatible with that. And so to move from what you were on to SAML was a big leap.
Right.
And I think it stalled for a number of years because a bulk of enterprises weren't ready or capable of doing that, both from a skills but also from a business process and technology perspective. They just weren't ready. And I think that's coming to a head now where companies are looking at that same identity infrastructure and saying, this is too expensive. And now I've started to see more and more companies looking at switching from that to essentially either a PaaS or a SaaS solution for that same application space, which is how will we manage our identities. And I think 5-6 years ago nobody thought of that as a service that you would do outside of your company, and now you are looking at doing that. And really the best interface to do that is SAML, is where you can interface with that. And so I think there is a push to do that, and it's something that our customers are exploring but not quite ready to do. And because we're focused on kind of larger enterprises that are looking to be more modern, they're all looking at it and evaluating it. So I think if we look 2-3 years out, I think SAML will be not as dominant, but I would say in conversation you would talk about SAML and kind of modern Active Directory LDAP in the same conversation. Right now it's sort of a side project or process, but I think you're going to look at SAML being at the same level, and then maybe many years down the road SAML will be dominant.
So do you see cloud-based solutions that hook into your Active Directory infrastructure as being your gateway to being able to absorb SAML-based solutions like your own?
So, and I should preface this. So we don't have SAML today, and we do have identity management, and we use the product to help us do that. And we're looking at expanding support for some of these capabilities in the future. But where I think you're going to see things is not so much SAML hooking into your existing LDAP infrastructure, but I think you'll see the SAML adoption grow up as people look to either externalize their LDAP and their management of their LDAP to a service provider, or they jump ship completely from their Active Directory solution to an identity service, which may or may not, offer them an LDAP interface in addition to a SAML interface.
Interesting.
Because of the cost, and I've seen, some of the companies I've worked at and done consulting with, their Active Directory structures are unwieldy and incredibly complex. And with that comes a tremendous cost that they're spending annually to maintain that. And that's where the push is coming from up above to say, we're spending this much to maintain this. And, now I'm seeing all my other CIO friends looking at some of these other services and spending a fraction of that. And, I need to see the savings. I need to, or I'm going to consider looking at some of these services.
And when you start doing that, don't you end up having to actually possibly even change a lot of the applications?
Absolutely.
So that you have the support you need for whatever you've chosen to use. And that, again, brings us back down to, is that the application, if it's unaware, forget it. I mean, it just won't work.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any difference where it is. It just won't work.
Yeah. And
so
I think
a big business that needs this legacy application, they're going to stick with whatever they need to make it work.
Yeah. And I think that, it's going to force down into the application layer and even into other layers to ensure that these things work. And it'll be a requirement that and I think when you look at it from that perspective, SAML makes even more sense for developers, because you don't have to do as much work because there's SAML libraries out there. There's been a fairly good development community around SAML. Most of it's been based around open source and academic work. Most of the SAML libraries that are out there are based around both of those. But you're seeing growth there. You're seeing software as a service providers that are providing identity solutions, saying, we're using SAML, here's our API, here's our interface.
Okay. Now, Service Mesh helps me do all the bits and bobs around the infrastructure, but will it do much around the actual application, whatever application I'm chosen?
It does, and one of the things that we've got is a product called Release Manager. It's a piece of Agility platform. And so with the application, one of the things you can do, besides just automating your server stack or your OS stack and the network and zones around it, you can also hook in to your build system. So if you've got a build server that's using common build technology like Jenkins, you can plug into that and connect it to Agility platform, so that as soon as you get a new build, your nightly build finishes of your application, then that component, whether it's a WAR file or whatever deliverable you're using, will now get published to Agility platform and automatically deployed into your dev environment, or your server that you've configured this to be hooked into. And so not only can you automate the deployment of those servers, but you can automate getting the updated artifacts on there based on your build process. And then now that it's there, you can start your testing, very quickly thereafter. And so it can take that time from building my application and having a working instance that I can test and play with, and have my testers go test against on a 24-hour cycle. It can take that down to be minutes.
Wonderful.
So, and with that, as I mentioned, Agility it's about automation and scale. And so, one of the things that we can envision, and I do say this in the future, we have all the automation framework to say, once I've received this artifact, do something with it, right? And the thing that we've done with it so far is to make sure that you can spin up a new server that has this artifact in it. But it's with the infrastructure we have in automation, it's entirely plausible to say, let's add another action to analyze that object, to do a static analysis, to do a bytecode analysis, and verify that it meets some, threshold of success. That's not all, out of the box, because it's using the automation features that are out of the box. But as I said, we're looking at working with customers to create use cases and reusable designs for doing some of these things.
So even though I have all this automation, John Troyer said it the other day, is that if you don't automate, going to the cloud is going to be incredibly painful, if not impossible. And I agree with him. You need to have some sort of automation script, some sort of automation tool to make sure that what you're doing has everything configured properly. If you look at a standard lamp stack, there's a lot of levers and buttons and dials that can be pushed and turned and pulled. Make it run. But even so, even though I automated it all, I still think there's a piece missing, and I think that any company just says, let's adopt this automation, they're going to have 3 or 4 engineers that are really going to know what happens, and they're going to be on call all the time. I think support is going to end up suffering if that's all we do is automate, because the cloud may or may not be able to help you solve your application problem. You have to still bring the knowledge with you. And with the application, I still think you need to bring the security with you as well.
Well, let's ask certainly the $64 question for the IT ops person. Does Service Mesh put IT ops out of business?
I don't think so. And I think what it does do, and there are other platforms like this out there, but I think the cloud in general is driving this. It does force IT ops to change. I don't think IT ops goes away, because I think you do have a core level of expertise that's needed to make all of these work and to integrate. And you've got a large body of knowledge that's really valuable in existing IT operations in terms of how to monitor, what to monitor, how to deploy, what to deploy, how to validate. And all of these things and these business processes that we have in IT are still valuable. They're not thrown away by the cloud, but they are forced to change and transform by the cloud to work at scale. And I think this has kind of become my mantra the last, year or two, where, probably 2 years ago, if you asked me, I would say that I didn't believe in the cloud. I thought it was really all marketing. And what really, got me and what clicked for me is, imagine what you do today with one server and all of the IT process that you have with one server, and then take that to 10 and 1,000 and 10,000. And when you look at that effort, really the way we're operating with IT and IT ops today is really around that 1 in 10 level. We're doing a lot of things manually. We're doing a lot of things. They're not necessarily bad things. We're doing a lot of good things within IT, but we're doing them at this scale and speed that's unsustainable when we look at going to 10,000, 100,000 times the speed of what we're doing today. And I think that's what cloud is going to push that transformation down the IT ops throat. And it's not a question of when we change, it's how soon and how we change.
Okay. And I agree with you. I think there's a lot there that we have to think about, is that security of an application, when you think about a single machine, is probably easy to set up, and it's a fairly manual process, or maybe even 10 machines or even 20 or so is a fairly manual process. But once you get above a certain number, you're going to need to automate it in some fashion.
That's right.
Whether that is you do something that's not one machine and it's copied over to every other machine using high-performance computing techniques, or you set it up inside of some engine that goes off and says, this is exactly how we're going to do it. We're going to check against it. We're going to implement this and check against it. Those all have to be done. But what I'm really talking about is I can do that for the host today. I can do that for the operating system. And I can do that for certain applications. Today I can't do it for all applications.
That's right.
And I think that's where things need to change.
Absolutely. And I think that's, well, you made a great point there about, running a cloud with 20 or 30 or 50 machines. And it's been interesting for me going to some of the cloud user groups and so forth where, the problems that users are talking about are, how do I scale from 5 machines to 10 or 50 or 20 or, maybe even 100 if I'm lucky. And I think this is one of the things that has made me really appreciate the product that Service Mesh has built is that, we've got customers that are running with well over 2,500 to 5,000 machines under management from Agility Platform. And that level of scale is important. And I think we have a long road to go. We can improve. We want to be at even, 10, 100 orders bigger than that, of magnitude bigger than that. So that's where we're going. I think your point is great as well in that we need to do that for the application. We need to automate more of that and have that type of verification be baked in from the beginning. And you're right in that we can do a lot more today with host level security than we can with the applications themselves. And that's certainly an area where I'm looking to improve what we're doing at Service Mesh.
Okay. Anybody else have any? I mean, we're at the end of our hour, and I appreciate, Bankum, for you to show up. And even I know you've been popping up and down, so I'll give you the first go.
Yeah,
What's
sorry,
your
guys. I'm actually driving around up here in Yosemite, so I've been dropping off and on.
Oh, then let's get you in. What's your last thoughts on all this?
Well, I've said it before. Seems to me that DevOps is enabling more security. And I believe that this is a way for DevOps users to get security in at the beginning of the software development lifecycle. And then as the applications scale into production, they'll have that security baked in.
Okay. Michael or Mike, whichever one of you wants to go next.
Sure. Yeah, I think solutions like this and from Service Mesh and other vendors are good for the enterprise in making cloud adoption a lot easier. Because, as you said, you really can't do these things onesie-twosies. You have to do them at scale. They almost have to be, you hate to say dumbed down, but I see it more as well-guided in the setup, configuration, and management of solutions in the cloud. And when you get into a situation like that, it makes it a lot easier to measure things that apply against security and then be able to report on them up to your C-level type folks. So it's a good thing.
Okay. Michael, you're next.
Michael, yeah. I think that Mike's okay with Mike, and I'm okay with Michael, and that helps us differentiate. I'm going to echo some of the things Mike said. I think this is an important component in the cloud ecosystem. So Service Mesh, in my humble opinion, is providing a valuable service. I think dumbing down or simplifying, whatever words you want to use, I think it's essential because there's an enormous amount of complexity in these environments, especially if you're talking multi-cloud. And anybody who can hide that complexity, and this is it sounds to me Service Mesh software crosses that line into a service broker. So I'm not going to get into that. That's like a whole other call we could have about service brokers. But I think that's good. I think the other thing though is this does not get the enterprise off the hook for risk management and understanding risk. It just gives them a partner. And that's good. I mean, I don't mean to minimize, but it's important to have a partner in this. And IT needs to step up and still understand what's going on underneath the hood here. I think that is the danger, is that it's a trust but verify, and you need to work with partners like Service Mesh, understand what they're doing, validate that what they are doing is right, and it continues to be right over time.
And I would second that, is that you really need people that understand what's going under the hood. Under the hood. You can't just rely on your automation suite or your tools to do everything right, because they're only going to do what you tell them to do, or someone told them to do, whoever that is. And policies change, and when things break, you're going to have to be able to fix it in-house. granted, I mean, I'm sure Service Mesh and other companies like that have great support, but when push comes to shove, it's going to be somebody's job inside that company to fix the problem, and they may have to fix it across 10,000 VMs or 10,000 machines sitting out in the cloud that they cannot access directly.
And then report on that. And then report on the fact that they actually did it.
Right.
Exactly. It's going to be a really... I'm struggling with, and this is just more of a personal statement, I'm struggling with sizes. I mean, people go, oh, I could do out in the cloud. And I'm thinking clouds are 50,000 VMs running on, 10 different data centers.
Yeah.
And that's the scale I'm looking at, and I don't know, that scale is hard to meet with any tool out there today.
Well, and here's the thing, and I'll just speak from, my small chair in a small startup. I'm not putting all my eggs in one cloud basket either. Everything I do in the cloud, I do in 2 cloud providers.
Yeah.
Or at least I should back that up a little bit. I'll walk it back. I'm working with people who I believe is causing me to put it in 2 cloud providers. There's always the possibility that everybody's using Amazon in the back end. But absent that, I'm working with more than 1 cloud provider. Yeah.
And the reason being is that some of these cloud providers do a great job, some do not, and you can never guarantee that one will always be up.
Well, even Amazon has had their failures, and they don't really commit to the kind of uptime that I really want. So, yeah.
Well, Michael,
if
you are using Amazon, you at least want to make sure you're in 2 different availability zones, right?
Yeah.
Of course.
And not only, and when you do that, you still want to be in multiple clouds because Amazon could ship something every day. Or, you don't know what's going to happen with any natural or unnatural types of disasters.
Yeah, exactly. I don't consider, I consider 2 availability zones a potential requirement for anybody using Amazon. Of course, it depends on, again, their risk analysis. They should make a informed decision of that cost. But even in 2 availability zones, I would not say that that's sufficient for some of the things I consider critical. I would still duplicate that out to another provider. So go ahead.
So this is why I bring up DevOps all the time is when people think, I'm just developing an app, it's not in production, so I don't need availability, right? If it goes down for some reason, I'll just continue working when it comes back up next week or something. But a lot of people treat security in the same way. They're like, this isn't a production app, it doesn't have any critical data in it, so I don't need to worry about security. And then they throw it over the fence to production and expect somebody else to fix the security problems and fix the reliability problems. And performance might even be in the same boat. But if you bring everything in and do security, performance, availability, I think that's what cloud enables you to do now with these automation tools, is bring security closer to the development process.
Yep. Yeah, I'll give you that.
At a lower
I'd say
cost,
one thing,
and even for smaller, you just need 1 server, or 2 servers.
Yeah, and I think one thing we're all kind of touching around is ultimately still this goes back to kind of basics of what is this system that we're deploying for the business? What are its uptime needs? What are its environmental needs? What are the constraints? What's the data that we're operating with? And we've got to build that system around all of that. So, and I agree with almost everything you guys have said, but it's all going to change depending on what kind of application you have. And so if this is your mission-critical e-commerce site and this is your business, then clearly 1 availability zone is not enough, and probably 1 cloud provider is not enough, and you may even need to have a colo either as a backup or as your primary to support that, because that's your business. But at the same time, if that's if you're a larger enterprise and the system that you're talking about is a marketing website that's going to be up for the 2 months after Super Bowl, after your big ad launches, well, it's a whole different set of constraints. You need scalability, you need the ability to expand based on a huge market hit, and the ability to wind down based on the drop of that spike that's going to come from one event. And all of that will change what you do in both the application design, the infrastructure design, and in the deployment into whether it's cloud or bare metal. And so I think all of those things are, fundamentals of IT, of computing, of software, and the cloud doesn't change all of those, but it does enable us to do all of those things faster and smarter if we choose to. And I'd say the same thing about DevOps. I'm a huge DevOps fan as well.
Yep, I agree. Awesome.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. It was a very fascinating call. I really liked it. And I think we're going to have more of these in the future about DevOps. Duncan, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Mr. Foley, thank you for... Go on.
You're welcome, and I'd love to come back if it makes sense.
Absolutely. I will definitely keep that in mind. And Mr. Foley, thank you for joining us as a permanent panelist for the future.
Thank you much, Edward. See you next week.
See you guys next week at RSA conference. We didn't do any predictions, but we're well over our time, so we'll have to do a post-show wrap-up. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Take care.
Thanks.
Ja. Kjør først. Kom igjen. Ja da. Ja, var forsiktig nå, ikke gjør du også. Ja. Kjør i vei. Ja. Det var helt polert. Får bare ha en sånn, ikke helt opp, men sånn litt sånn igjen sånn. Nå er det ikke så mye oppoverbakke igjen. Kjør først.
Hvis jeg er i mål nå, første bil og kjører ut, så må du bare kjøre fram, så går du gjennom målsonen, så venter du utenfor der. Ok? Ja, utenfor når du passer småsverten og sånn. Venter du der til vi kan hente. Ja, det er noe du da, vet du.
Jepp, det er målet.
litt der det er plass her nå, vet du.
Ferdig fra scenen her nå, så det er Markus og Martine som er på plass her igjen klokka 2, for de har lyst til å få med seg det. Og det er det siste de gjør her i dag. Nå har de vært og testet langrennsløypa, de også. Så vi får håpe at de får igjen kreftene til klokka 2. De får gi oss et skikkelig avslutningsshow. Da blir det bare litt av vent, for nå skal neste artistene rigge seg til. Det er da Therese Ulvaren og Charles Gron. Vi må bare smøre oss litt med tålmodighet her, så blir det ganske straks.
Leo!